Windsor. Saturday, the 19th of June, 1999. Inside St. George's Chapel, a man of 35 is marrying a woman of 34, and the cameras outside devour every second of it. This is the last of the Queen's 4 children to marry, and by the standards of the previous decade, it is a modest affair. No glass coach, no cathedral, no global audience in the hundreds of millions. Windsor rather than London. A chapel rather than an abbey. The family has learned something about scale. Roughly a mile away, in the machinery that surrounds every royal wedding, something else is happening. And it will outlast the marriage vows in historical consequence by a considerable margin. Buckingham Palace issues a statement to the press. It is not a ceremony. There is no parchment. There is no seal, no assembled council, no lawyer with a folder. The single most consequential decision anyone will make about the children of this marriage arrives the way a change to a train timetable arrives. As a text handed to reporters, timed to a day when every reporter in Britain is already pointed at Windsor. The statement does the expected thing first. The groom is created Earl of Wessex and Viscount Severn. The bride becomes Countess of Wessex. Fine. Standard. The wedding day peerage is one of the oldest reflexes in the institution. Then it does the unexpected thing. The Queen, it says, has also decided, with the agreement of the couple, that any children they might have should not be given the style His or Her Royal Highness. They would instead carry the courtesy titles borne by the sons and daughters of an Earl. Any children they might have. Note the tense. At the moment that sentence is released to the British press, the couple in the chapel have been married for a matter of hours. There is no daughter, there is no son, there is no pregnancy. There is a decision, published, about people who do not exist yet, and it will still be in force 27 years later. The sovereign's youngest son and his bride, Prince Edward and Sophie Rhys-Jones. Their daughter would be born 4 years later. Her name is Lady Louise Mountbatten-Windsor, and she has never in her life been styled princess. If you only know the version of this story, where 2 modern parents turn down a princess title for their daughter, you have the ending of a decision without its beginning. And, more awkwardly for the popular telling, you have the wrong person making it. The word that follows this story everywhere, in headline after headline, is refused. Edward and Sophie refused. That word is doing an enormous amount of work, and almost none of it is accurate. So here is what this video actually argues. The decision not to raise Lady Louise as a princess was not a parental refusal, and it was not made in a hospital corridor in 2003. And it was not made by her parents alone. It was a palace decision taken by the Queen with her son and daughter-in-law's agreement, announced in public in writing before the child existed. And it was entirely consistent with what the institution had spent the previous decade learning the hard way. Which leaves us 4 questions. Who actually made this call, and when? If the governing document, a set of letters patent from 1917. Still entitled Louise to the princely style, what did a press release in 1999 actually do to it? Why did her mother say, on the record in 2020, that the children have the titles and could choose to use them at 18? And was that true? And what did Louise herself do when she turned 18? hold on to one phrase from that 1999 statement, should not be given the style His or Her Royal Highness. 11 words. We are coming back to them in about 20 minutes. When the Countess of Wessex sits down with a Sunday newspaper and says something that 11 words cannot quite support. That collision is the whole story. Let's get into it. To understand what the palace did in 1999, you need to know what it was doing something to. And the answer is a document signed by a nervous king in the middle of a war. On the 30th of November 1917, George V issued letters patent. Britain was 3 years into a war against Germany. The royal house had just renamed itself Windsor to shed its German titles. And the king wanted the royal family to be smaller and more obviously British. The instrument survives in the National Archives under the reference HO 12515, and it was published in the London Gazette. Its function was restriction. Before 1917, the princely style spread outward through the family tree in ways that were becoming, from a public relations standpoint, difficult to justify. After 1917, it stopped at a defined border. The children of the sovereign, the children of the sovereign's sons, and the eldest son of the eldest son of the Prince of Wales. Those people would hold what the document calls the style, title, or attribute of Royal Highness with the dignity of prince or princess. Everyone else, further out, would not. Now do the arithmetic for our subject. Edward is a son of the sovereign. His children are therefore grandchildren of the monarch in the male line. Squarely inside the 1917 border, under the governing instrument, a daughter of Prince Edward is entitled to be a princess. And here is the crucial point, the one that almost every retelling of this story gets wrong. The 1917 letters patent were never amended for Edward's children. No new letters patent were issued in 1999. Nothing was revoked, stripped, cancelled, or overturned. The entitlement stayed exactly where it was. What changed was that the style would not be given, not announced, not used, not applied. A right on paper left permanently in the drawer, which is a strange thing to do to a document, and it only makes sense if you look at what the 10 years before 1999 had done to this family. Meet the groom properly. Prince Edward, born 1964, the Queen's fourth and youngest child. In 1987, at 23, he joined the Royal Marines and then left the 12-month commando course. According to The Times, reporting in January of that year, after completing roughly a third of it, it was covered as a national humiliation, which tells you rather a lot about the era. He went into theatre production, then television. In 1993, he incorporated a company called Ardent Productions and spent much of the decade attempting the thing the modern British royal family has never once managed cleanly: to convert royal status into a commercial career. Ardent made documentaries. Ardent struggled. The press treated every commission as evidence that the prince was selling access to his own family, and every failure as proof he couldn't. The title he took on his wedding day carried its own small oddity. The Telegraph reported in 1999 that Edward had asked for Wessex after seeing the character of the Earl of Wessex in the film Shakespeare in Love. A story that has followed the peerage ever since, attributed but never officially confirmed. and worth exactly as much as the outlet you got it from. Now widen the lens, because the world these two were marrying into in '99 was not the world of 1981. The intervening decade had been, institutionally speaking, a demolition. 3 of the Queen's 4 children had seen their marriages fail in public. The tabloid press had spent years running the private lives of the family as a continuous serial, with tapes, with sources, with photographers permanently deployed. In 1997, the mother of the second and third in line to the throne had died in a car crash in Paris while being pursued through a tunnel, and the monarchy's response had triggered a crisis of public confidence, severe enough to force changes in how it presented itself. By 1999, there was an active internal conversation. Never a single published policy, but a direction of travel visible in decision after decision, about a monarchy with fewer titled people in it, doing more clearly defined work. Here, stated once and plainly, is the pattern that organizes this entire story. A family that had watched royal status curdle from an asset into a liability decided, before either child existed, to hand their children less of it. Everything that follows is that decision holding. Which brings us to the duel. Because there are 2 versions of the 1999 decision in circulation, and only one of them is in the record. The popular version goes like this. Edward and Sophie, having watched what happened to Diana, refused the princess title for their daughter. They wanted a normal life for her. They made a brave, modern, slightly rebellious parental choice against the wishes of an old institution, and they made it as parents, looking at a real child. This is the version that powers most of the coverage from around 2020 onward, and it draws its authority from a genuine Sophie interview we will get to. The documented version goes like this. On the 19th of June 1999, the wedding day, before any child existed, Buckingham Palace announced that the Queen had decided, with the agreement of Edward and Sophie, that their future children would not be given the style of Royal Highness. The verb is decided, the subject is the sovereign, and the couple's role is agreement. That release was reported contemporaneously by the BBC and survives in the government news archives. Which version is correct? The second one, comprehensively. And it isn't close. The popular telling gets the actor wrong and the date wrong by at least 4 years. But the first version isn't malicious invention. And here's the fairness point. Edward and Sophie did agree publicly, and they have spent a quarter of a century behaving as though they meant it. The distinction that matters is between a refusal made by parents about their child and a policy set by a monarch about a category of person who did not yet exist. One is a family anecdote. The other is constitutional housekeeping. And there is a third reading, softer than both, which the record supports lightly rather than firmly. The 1999 decision was presented at the time as the couple's wish for a less formal life for their children, and that was probably true. It was also, just as probably, an early move in a much longer institutional project to reduce the number of titled royals. Both things can be true at once. The public was told the first one. What nobody was told in 1999 was how it would feel to enforce it. Because in June of that year, the enforcement was theoretical. It became real on a November night, 4 years later, in an NHS hospital in Surrey, with the father of the child 3 continents away. Before that night, though, there is 2001, and 2001 is where the theory got tested on the parents themselves. It was not a kind year. In the spring, Sophie suffered an ectopic pregnancy. A pregnancy implanted outside the uterus cannot continue, and which is a medical emergency for the mother. It was reported at the time, and it was, by any measure, a private event conducted in public. And then, in April, a man arranged a meeting with her. He presents himself as a wealthy Arab businessman. He wants to discuss a contract with the public relations firm the Countess of Wessex co-runs, because that is the arrangement she is living under. A working royal with a commercial career, which is precisely the balance her husband has been trying to strike for a decade. The meeting takes place. She talks at length the way people talk when they are trying to win business, and the client seems to enjoy being told things. She is recorded. The tape includes disparaging remarks about the Prime Minister and about the Prince of Wales. There is no wealthy Arab businessman. There is a reporter for the News of the World, working a technique he has by this point turned into a national industry. His real name is Mazhar Mahmood. The story ran. The fallout was total. Sophie left the PR firm and the model of the royal with a parallel commercial career. The model Edward had spent the 90s building at considerable personal cost was finished as a serious proposition. Now, the sequencing matters here, and I want to be careful about it, because this is exactly the point where a lot of retellings quietly commit fraud. The fake shake sting happened in April 2001. The decision about the children's titles was announced in June 1999. 2 years earlier, the sting did not cause the decision, and any version of this story that implies it did has run the tape backwards to make a better narrative. What the sting did was demonstrate, with a thoroughness nobody could have wanted, that the assumptions behind the 1999 decision were correct. The press could get inside anything. Royal status did not protect you from that. It was the reason you were a target. And if you want the irony in its purest form, it arrives in the same year from the other direction. Ardent Productions. Edward's company sent a crew to St Andrews and breached the media agreement that was keeping Prince William's University years private. The palace had negotiated that blackout carefully. The man who broke it worked for the Queen's youngest son. The family that had just been violated by an undercover reporter was, in the same 12 months, on the wrong end of a privacy complaint about its own television company. 2 years later, the abstract policy of 1999 acquired a person. Saturday, the 8th of November, 2003. Bagshot Park, Surrey, the couple's home. Sophie is 38 years old and roughly 4 weeks from her due date when she suffers a placental abruption. The placenta separating from the wall of the uterus before delivery. It is one of the more dangerous things that can happen in a late pregnancy, for both mother and child. And it happens fast. An ambulance takes her to Frimley Park Hospital. Frimley Park is an NHS District General Hospital. It is not a private wing with a brass plaque and a photo call on the steps. Her husband is not there. Prince Edward is in Mauritius on an official visit several thousand miles and an entire hemisphere away. At 23:32 Greenwich Mean Time, an emergency caesarean section delivers a daughter. She weighs 4 pounds 9 ounces, about the weight of a bag of sugar and a half, small enough that the decision about what happens next is made immediately and made on medical grounds. The baby is transferred to the neonatal unit at St George's Hospital in Tooting, in South London, as a precaution. Her mother does not go with her. Sophie's own condition, after significant blood loss, keeps her at Frimley Park. So the night ends like this. A newborn in one hospital, her mother in another, her father on an aircraft somewhere over the Indian Ocean. The most photographed family in Britain, distributed across 3 points on a map, and none of them able to reach either of the others. Edward described it afterwards. Speaking to the Telegraph in 2003, he called it a profound shock, and added that he had been told she was going to be fine, but that he had not known. That last clause is the whole thing. It was a profound shock. He was told she would be fine. He did not know. A man being briefed by telephone about whether his wife and daughter are going to live. From the other side of the world, in the language of official reassurance. The child came through it. So did her mother. The name was announced on the 26th of November, more than a fortnight later. Louise Alice Elizabeth Mary. She was, at that moment, 8th in line to the throne, closer to the crown at birth than most people ever get, and already, by a decision published 4 years before she existed, not a princess. The christening came on the 24th of April, 2004, in the private chapel at Windsor Castle, conducted by David Connor, the Dean of Windsor. 5 godparents were named: Lady Sarah Chatto, Lord Ivar Mountbatten, Lady Alexandra Etherington, Francesca Schwarzenbach, and Rupert Elliot. And the baby wore the christening gown. The original, the Honiton lace one, commissioned in 1841 for Queen Victoria's eldest daughter, worn by royal infants for 163 years. Louise was the last. A replica was made afterwards. Every royal baby since has worn the copy. Hold that image, because it is the sharpest single frame in this story. The last child ever to wear the actual gown of the actual dynasty is the child the dynasty had already agreed would not carry its style. There is a second piece of machinery visible at that font, and almost nobody notices it. In 1960, the Queen made a formal declaration on the family surname. Descendants who do not carry the style of Royal Highness would use the name Mountbatten-Windsor. It was a fix for a specific problem, Prince Philip's name, and how it would survive into the family tree. For 4 decades, it applied mainly to people down the line. Louise was the first child to receive that surname at birth as a direct consequence of not being given the royal style. The 1999 statement did not merely remove something. It routed her into a different naming system entirely, and that is the name a university official would read out over a stage 22 years later. Her brother arrived on the 17th of December 2007 at the hospital and was styled Viscount Severn, the courtesy title, of an Earl's eldest son, exactly as the 1999 statement had specified. 2 children, 2 sets of Earl's children courtesy titles, 1 policy holding without amendment. And then the parents did the part that was actually difficult, which was not the announcement. It was the 18 years afterwards. You can be granted a lesser style by press release in an afternoon. Building a childhood that matches it takes considerably longer, and the evidence that they built one is behavioural, rather than declarative. The children grew up at Bagshot Park, a Victorian pile of some 120 rooms, which is not a normal house by any definition available to the viewer. So let's not oversell this as a cottage. But inside it, the royal identifiers were reportedly absent. No curtsying instruction, no explanation of where the family sat in the constitutional order. The evidence for that is a story Sophie told in a 2016 interview, and it is the single best documented detail of the entire normalcy project. Louise came home from school and said, "Well, Mummy, people keep on telling me that Grandma is the Queen." Think about the mechanics of that sentence. Not, "Grandma is the Queen, people keep on telling me." The information arrived from outside the house, as a rumour from classmates, and was brought home for verification. That is one anecdote told by a mother about her own family. And it is the kind of story that gets polished in the telling. But it is on the record, in her words, and it is consistent with everything else that is documented about how those two children were raised, including the years in which Louise underwent surgical treatment for a childhood eye condition, discussed publicly by her mother in terms that were medical rather than royal. So by the early 2010s, the arrangement looks stable and looks settled. A policy set in 1999, a family living inside it, two children with courtesy titles and a surname that quietly announces what they are not. And then, in the summer of 2020, with Britain locked down and the country reading more newspapers than it had in years, the Countess of Wessex gave an interview and said something about those titles that nobody at the palace had ever said, and that the 1999 statement does not contain. The interview ran in the Sunday Times magazine in June 2020, conducted by Christina Lamb. Sophie was talking about how she and Edward were raising their children, and the framing she offered was economic. "They try to bring them up," she said, "with the understanding that they are very likely to have to work for a living. Hence," she added, "the decision not to use HRH titles." Note that verb, use, not receive, not hold, use. It is the first public signal from inside the family that the 1999 arrangement might be understood as something other than a closed door. And then she said the thing. "They have them," she said, "and can decide to use them from 18. But she thought it highly unlikely. Now, I promised you 11 words about 20 minutes ago, and here they are again, from the Palace statement of the 19th of June, 1999. The children should not be given the style His or Her Royal Highness. Put the two sentences side by side. Should not be given. They have them and can decide to use them from 18. Those are not the same claim. They are not even adjacent. One describes a style withheld. The other describes a style possessed and available on request at a fixed age, like a trust fund maturing. And the gap between them is where this entire story has been living for the last 6 years. Because almost every Lady Louise could have been a princess, but chose not to be. Headline you have ever seen descends from that single sentence in that single interview. So, which is it? The establishment version, meaning the version the documents support, goes like this. The letters patent of 1917 entitle the children of the sovereign's sons to the princely style. That entitlement was never revoked for Edward's children. No new letters patent were issued in 1999 or since. So in the narrow, technical, on-paper sense, something does exist that has never been formally taken away. Sophie's, they have them, is pointing at that. The revisionist version. And here the revisionists are the royal historians, which is an unusual configuration for this channel. Goes like this. Genealogists and constitutional specialists, among them Marlene Koenig, have pointed out the obvious problem. The 1999 statement contains no opt-in language whatsoever. It sets no age. It describes vertigo. It does not say until they are 18 or unless they later request otherwise. It says the style should not be given, full stop. There is no mechanism by which a person turns 18, files something, and emerges as a Royal Highness. And there is no precedent. Nobody has ever done this because there has never been a route to do it. Which version is correct? Probably the second, with the first as a technicality that has been asked to carry more weight than it can bear. The honest formulation is this. An unrevoked entitlement is not the same thing as an available option. Styles in the British system are regulated by the sovereign's prerogative. The Crown decides what people are called, and the Crown had already decided. Whether a future monarch could announce that Louise was to be styled Princess is a different question, and the answer is presumably yes. In the same way, the Queen announced the opposite in 1999. But that would be the Crown's act, not Louise's election. The choice Sophie described, a young woman reaching 18 and deciding, has never been shown to exist. And the reason we can be relatively confident about that is that we watched the date go past. The 8th of November 2021. Lady Louise Mountbatten-Windsor turned 18. Nothing happened. No announcement, no change of style, no court circular entry, no palace statement, no clarification of any kind. The birthday came, the birthday went, and the following morning she was exactly what she had been the previous morning. Lady Louise, daughter of an Earl, 17 years into a decision made before she was born. And here is where I have to correct the coverage again, because the headlines that followed had her choosing. She turned down the title. She refused the crown. She followed her parents' example. All of it warm, all of it flattering, and none of it supported by anything, because Lady Louise has never made a public statement about her titles at all. Not at 18, not since. There is no interview, no quote, no line in a statement. The entire she chose. Narrative is an inference laid over a silence, and inference is fine, but it should be labelled. What is documented is an absence. No change occurred, and nobody announced one. What happened next was that the private life ran into the public one anyway, in the way it always does. On the 8th of September 2022, Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral, and Louise, 18 years old, 7 weeks from 19, stood vigil beside her grandmother's coffin with her cousins. It was one of the few times in her life she had appeared at the centre of a national ceremony, and she appeared in it as what she is, a family member without a working role. Earlier that same summer, she had done something considerably less ceremonial. According to The Sun, reporting in August 2022, she had taken a holiday job at a garden centre in Surrey, potting and pruning plants for £6.83 an hour. That is the outlet's figure. And it is worth naming the outlet, because that number has since been reprinted everywhere as though it were carved into stone. What the figure buys you, if it is right, is the cleanest illustration in this whole story of what the 1999 statement actually purchased. A person who is formally within the 1917 entitlement, standing in a shop apron, being paid roughly the going rate. Then, on the 10th of March, 2023, King Charles III created his brother, Duke of Edinburgh. The coverage treated this as a restoration, a father's title passing to a son, an ending. It was more limited than that. The dukedom was granted to Edward for life only. It is not hereditary, and it reverts to the crown on his death. James, who had been Viscount Severn, moved up to the courtesy title Earl of Wessex. And Louise. Louise's style did not change. It has never changed. A duke's daughter, in the ordinary run of the peerage, would be styled Lady, which is what she already was as an earl's daughter. So the elevation was, for her, entirely invisible. This is the point at which it helps to say plainly what three separate systems are doing here, because the coverage blends them constantly. Peerage titles are one system. Dukedoms, earldoms, and the courtesy styles that children of peers use, which is where Louise's Lady comes from. Royal styles are a second system. HRH, Prince, Princess, regulated by the sovereign through instruments like the 1917 Letters Patent, and through announcements like the one in 1999. And the line of succession is a third system entirely, governed by statute. The Bill of Rights, the Act of Settlement, and the Succession to the Crown Act 2013, which ended male preference primogeniture for those born after October 2011 and removed the disqualification for marrying a Catholic. That act changed the order of the throne. It changed nothing about anybody's title. Louise's position in all three systems is independent. She is a lady by peerage courtesy, not a princess by royal style, and as of the end of July 2026, she stands 17th in line to the throne, down from 8th at birth, because cousins keep being born ahead of her. Which brings us to a hall in Fife, and to the only ceremony in this story that Louise chose to attend on her own account. Since the 2nd of July 2026, she graduated from the University of St Andrews with a degree in English. Some reports add international relations. Her parents were in the audience. She had spent 4 years there, in the same university her cousin William attended 2 decades earlier, and had done it without the media agreement, the negotiated blackout, or the crisis management his years required. She had simply gone and studied and finished. Reports since have described plans for a gap year. So the verdict, and it needs to cut both ways. The case against this decision is that it was made by other people in public about a person who did not exist and could not consent, and then presented for the rest of her life as though it were hers. Louise was never given a choice. She was given a fait accompli and, in 2020, a public suggestion by her mother that a choice existed which nobody has ever demonstrated exists. That is a slightly cruel gift. the appearance of agency without the mechanism. And the decision was not purely altruistic. It served the institution as much as the child, at a moment when the institution urgently needed to look smaller. The case for it is the 27 years of consistency. This family announced a policy on their wedding day, and then, unlike almost every other modern royal undertaking, actually kept to it. Through a birth that nearly went catastrophically wrong, through a sting operation, through a bereavement, through a dukedom, they did not quietly upgrade the children when it became convenient. They did not brief the press about titles withheld. Whatever was intended in 1999, what was delivered was a young woman who can walk into a garden centre, a lecture hall, and a graduation ceremony as herself. And the ironies sit there, documented and unimproved. The father who spent the 1990s trying to convert royal status into a television career ended up removing that status from his daughter's name. The child who was the last of the dynasty to wear its real christening gown is the one who never carried its style. And the surname that Prince Philip fought for and lost in 1952. Mountbatten reached Louise at birth precisely because she was not made a Royal Highness. He got his name into the family tree through the one grandchild the family had agreed not to make royal. Windsor and Fife, 27 years apart. In 1999, a statement handed to reporters says that any children should not be given the style His or Her Royal Highness. In 2026, in a university hall, a stranger with a list reads out the graduand's name. No style, no title, 4 words, and a 22-year-old walks across a stage while her parents watch. A decision made before she was born was finally read aloud by a man who had no idea he was quoting it. Thanks for watching. If there's a subject you want next, put it in the comments. I read them. Prince Edward and the Strange Decade of Ardent Productions is already in the queue, and so is the 1952 fight over the Mountbatten name, which is a nastier story than the polite version suggests. Until then.